when it's a leap year and you combine it into a single month, you've got 2 months worth of yard sites. Year of Learning by Dr. Paul Koningsberg in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Labush, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nissen Hara, Nissen ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann, memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. The many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Saratova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gidler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel ben Harav Shimon, friends of Joe Wolf, in memory of Yosef ben Chaim, Sharon and Fred Lisker, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman Edel Bas Yaakov. Adina, a Month of Learning by Adina and Michael Kirshner, in memory of their parents, Florence and Nathan Kirshner, and friend Harriet Friedman. Jumping down. That's Stanley Presser, in memory of his mother, Leah Bas Yehuda, his mother-in-law, Golda Bas Avram, and his wife, Ruchel Mincha Bas Moshe. Ruth Burian and Judy and Edward Boehm, in memory of Ruth and Judy's mother, Hadassah Bas Azriel Zelig Miriam, and father, Yitzchak ben Yosef Esther. Jill and Perry Meltzer, in memory of her father, Yaakov ben Yosef. B. Pizer, in memory of her mother, Razel Bas Shammai, and her stepfather, Avram Michal ben Shmuel Halevi. A Week of Learning by Charlie Gelfenstein and Sam and Ramona Levine, in memory of Charlie's wife and Sam's sister, Menucha Sarah Bas Yechiel Michal. Michael and Judy Paretsky, in memory of his brother, Chaim Tzvi ben Gershon. Barbara and Sandy Cohen, in memory of his brother, Chaim Sholem Aryeh ben Eliyahu HaKohen. Zev Kipperman and Sherry Dobicki, in memory of Zev's wife and Sherry's mother, Sheva Libi bat Reb Moshe. A Day of Learning today, plus Torah Fund, sponsored by Gloria and Asher Hertzberg, in memory of her mother, Esther Bas Shlomo. Also today, a Day of Learning by Pearl and Milton Frank, in memory of their son, Chaim Matityahu ben Moshe V'Perel Gittel. Ruth and Ed Goldberg, Day of Learning, in memory of her father, David Tzvi ben Meshulam. Rizal Garfield, in memory of her husband, Dober Shnucham ben Yehuda. May Neshamas have an Aliyah, Kranker Rafia, Velti Yashir Hashem Atzliah, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael, a good gebenched Yar. Okay? And happy, I guess, Valentine's Day to those who observe the day. Okay. The Gemara today is a bit complicated, but we'll do it as well as we can. Question was where to pick up from yesterday. Okay, hopefully everybody was able to go through Pei Daled, Amud Aleph and Beis, the new Mishnah, okay, with terms of bones, okay, whether one gets Malchus or not, all right? And okay, and that discussion then continued through Pei Daled Amud Beis, okay, and towards the bottom of Pei Daled Amud Beis. I'm starting about 6 lines up from the bottom. Okay? Itmar. Right? Ever she'en aleha kazayat basar b'makom zeh. Okay, if you have a limb of the animal that does not have a olive volume's worth of meat in a place. V'yesh alav kazayat basar b'makom acher. And does have an olive's volume of meat in another place. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, says Rabbi Yochanan, yesh bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. There is a concern about the fact of breaking the bone. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar, says Reish Lakish, ein bo mishum shvirat etzem. That does not apply, that Torah prohibition regarding the Pesach offering. Eitivei Rabbi Yochanan LaRabbi Shimon ben Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan challenges him with the following braita. Ve'etzem lo tishberu vo. A pasuk says you cannot have a bone, shall not break it. What does that mean? Echad etzem sheyesh alav kazayat basar, ve'echad etzem she'ein alav kazayat basar. That applies to whether it is a bone that has an olive volume of meat or whether it does not have an olive volume of meat. Mai ein alav kazayat basar. What then do we mean when we say that it does not have a olive volume of meat on it? Ilema de ein alav kazayat basar klal. If we're saying then that it does not have a olive volume of meat whatsoever, amai yesh bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. Why then would our braita say that we have to deal with the question of the pasuk about breaking any bone? Ela, lav hachi ka'amar. Rather, that's not what it's trying to tell us. Echad etzem sheyesh alav kazayat basar b'makom zeh. But we're talking about a situation where that bone, okay, that has a olive volume of meat in that place. Ve'echad she'ein alav kazayat basar b'makom zeh. Okay, or also a bone that does not have a olive volume of meat in that same place, right? V'yesh alav kazayat basar b'makom acher. But it does possess an olive volume of meat in another place. So the Gemara says there, Kasha l'Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. That seems to be problematic to the attitude of Reish Lakish, right? Who said that Shviras Etzem does not apply. Amarle. So now we get to Pehei. What said? Amarle, he said to him, Lo, that's not the case. Hachi ka'amar. This is what it means to be telling us. Echad etzem sheyesh alav kizayat basar mibachutz. The same applies to a bone that has a olive volume of meat on the outside. Ve'echad etzem she'ein alav kizayat basar mibachutz. And also to a bone that does not have a olive volume of meat on the outside. V'yesh alav kazayat basar mibifnim, but it does possess a olive volume of meat, in other words, of marrow inside the bone, b'makom shvira, at the place where it could be broken. So the Gemara now tells us, Vahatanya, but aren't we taught elsewhere in another braita, Ve'etzem lo tishberu vo, that the bone should not be broken, Echad etzem sheyesh bo moach, Ve'echad etzem she'ein bo moach. The same applies to a bone that has marrow, the same to a bone that does not have marrow. Uma'ani mekayem. And if that's the case, how then do I establish the pasuk that says, Va'achlo et habasar balayla hazeh, about eating the meat that night? Babasar she'al gabe ha'etzem. That refers to the meat that is on the bone. O eno, or perhaps not. Ela, rather, babasar shebatocha etzem, perhaps to the meat that's inside the bone, the marrow. Uma'ani mekayem. If that's the case, how then do I establish and maintain the pasuk, interpret it, ve'etzem lo tishberu bo, that again, it says that the bone cannot be broken, be'etzem she'ein bo moach, with a bone that has no marrow, aval be'etzem sheyesh bo moach, but with a bone that does have marrow, shover, one could break it, ve'ochel, and eat it. So the Gemara then says, va'al titma, and don't be surprised, sheharei yavo aseh, v'yidche lo ta'aseh, that it's possible that in this case, we might have a positive command that pushes aside the negative command. The negative command meaning that you can't break the bone, but the positive command that you have to eat it. Kashehu omer etzem lo tishberu bo, and when we say, right, that the bone cannot be broken, but Pesach Sheni, maybe then that applies to the offering on Pesach Sheni. She'ein Talmud Lomar. But there, doesn't the Torah already tell us the following? Sheharei kvar ne'emar. For already it's been said, Kechol chukata Pesach ya'asu oto. Like all the laws of the Korban Pesach, right, of the offering that's done on the first Pesach, you shall do it. Therefore, says the Gemara, Have Omer, this seems then to be telling us, Echad etzem sheyesh bo moach, ve'echad etzem she'ein bo moach, that the same thing applies to a bone that has marrow. It also applies to a bone that does not have marrow. Hold on, says the Gemara. Meitive. We're going to challenge that with another braita. It says as follows. Eiver she'atza mikzato. If you have a limb of the animal that went outside its proper boundary. Okay? And what do we mean by that? Maybe for some reason the animal was, part of the animal was outside the azara. Chotech el ad makom shemagia la'etzem. We cut off that place up to the point of the bone. Okay. V'kolef ad shemagia la'perek. And then we peel off this meat, okay, until we reach the joint. V'chotech, and then we cut it off. V'i amart, and if you're going to say, Eiver she'ein elav kezayet basar b'makom zeh, that this particular limb does not have a olive volume amount of meat at that location, v'yesh b'makom acher, and it has meat in another location, ein bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem, that it does not fall in the category, I'm going to say, of the biblical prohibition of not breaking the bone. Lama li dekolef ad shemagia leperek v'chotech. Why then does the Braita say that we have to peel off the layer of meat until we get to the joint and then cut it? Instead, niklof be, porta. Let's simply peel off a little bit. Vinitbare, and break it. Abaye amar, says Abaye, is following. Mishum pekka. Why? Because we're concerned that the bone will crack. Ravina amar, says Ravina, bekulit. We're concerned maybe that it's the thigh bone that doesn't have any marrow. Tanan, but we taught at Hatam, another Mishnah elsewhere. And this Mishnah is going to try to perhaps answer this question. Hapigul, if we have meat, right, that is no longer valid because of Kohanim intent. Vahanotar, and meat that has been left over. Vahatame, okay, and meat that's become tame. Mitam'in et hayadayim. We say that they render the hands of the Kohen or the person tame. Rav Huna v'Rav Chisda, the two of them have perhaps a machloket. Why? Chad amar mipnei chashdei kahuna. One explained the Braita, this Mishnah, that we're concerned about the following, namely the suspicious priests are suspected, the Kohanim are suspected of purposely disqualifying offerings to impoverish the owners. V'chad amar mipnei atzile kahuna. And one of them says because of lazy Kohanim, namely that lazy priests would be stripping them, stopping them from allowing others to eat the offering. Right? Now, mar matne apigul, but one master taught it in regards to pigul, umar matne anotar, and one master taught his explanation regarding leftovers meat. Man de matne apigul, the one who taught it, the Mishnah, in regards to pigul, mishum chashte kahuna, taught it in regards to the suspicion of the Kohanim, right? That by their change of intent, they're purposely disqualifying those korbanos, and therefore the owner would have to bring another korban and begin to impoverish them. Right? Uman de matne anotar, and the one who taught it, his explanation applying to notar, leftover offerings, mishum atzile kahuna, because the Kohanim were lazy, right? Therefore, they left the meat the offering to be left over, and thus it wouldn't enable other Kohanim to eat it. Okay, and now continuing, right? Mar matne kazayat, but there was a clear machloket here, in that one master taught that the volume, was a olive volume, umar matne kabetza, and the other master taught that the volume had to be a egg volume. Man de matne kazayat, the one who taught that the volume was that of an olive, ke'isuro, as when tuma, for example, would be prohibited by a volume of olive, and therefore that's the issue. Uman de matne kibetza, and the one who taught that the volume had to be an egg volume, ketumato, that one thought it had to be when it was tame. So if it was forbidden by a volume of an olive, that was one's view. If it was only tame only became prohibited as tome by an egg volume, that was his view. Now, the Gemara tells us we don't have a clear conclusion to whether it was Rav Huna or Rav Chisda who said which, nor do we see an example, a final solution at this point, that it comes to prove our case. So we now find the Gemara raising another question. Ibayalaho. So they're asked in the academy, Yotze, say that this korban went outside the temple area, the temple precinct, the Azara. Gazru Rabbanan Tuma Olo. Did the rabbis then declare that offering Tameh or not? Mi Amrinin, Notar de Gazru Tuma, the Ate Leiatzulebe. Do we say, like in regards to Notar, that they made a decree to make it Tameh because the priests, Kohani, might be lazy in regards to it? Aval Yotze, but in terms of it going outside the Azara, Afuke Biadayim, okay, doing so directly, Lo Mafkile Biadayim, Kohanim would not do so directly. Lo Gazru Be Rabbanan Tuma, that the rabbis then did not make a gezerah declaring it Tameh. O Dilma, or perhaps Lo Shna, that there may be no difference. Tashma, listen to the following Braita to see if it gives us an answer. Ever Shiatza Miktsato, a limb of the animal that went outside its proper boundary. Chotech ad shemagia le'etzem, we cut until we reach the bone. Vikolef, and we peel off ad shemagia le'perek, until we get to the joint. Vichotech, and then we cut. Ve'i amrinan, and if you want to say, Gazru be Rabbanan Tuma, that in that case the rabbis would declare that meat Tameh, ki chatoch, when we cut it, mai have. So what's the result of that? You still have meat then what was Tameh in touch with regular meat. Ha kimitame le. Here in this case, it would transfer tuma. Tumat starimhi, says the Gemara. Now that is a question of hidden tuma. V'tumat starim lo matamya. And we say that when it's hidden tuma, in other words, when it's been covered by other meat, it doesn't transfer its tuma. Ula Ravina. However, according to Ravina, the Amar Chibure Ochlin Lav Chiburhu, that any connection to touching, association of some foodstuffs to another is not a real connection. Ukeman de mefarte dami, and it's as if they are separated. Mai ikala meimar. What are you going to say then? Ha kenaga v'hadedai. Here, it's a case of when they come touch one another. V'kamitame. That's when they transfer tuma. Ela laman dematne kizayit. And therefore, according to the one in our Rav Chisda and Rav Huna argument, who took the position that it was in regards to a olive volume, delete be kazayit, when it doesn't have a olive volume of meat, uman dematne kebetza, and according to the one who taught that it had to be a egg volume, delete be kibetza. It also holds that it didn't have that. So when there is no minimum shiur, regardless of what you claim that shiur is, there's no transfer of tumah. Tashma, says the Braita, a new Braita. What about the following? Hamotzi basar pesach mechavura lechavira. Let's say one transfers the meat of the Pesach offering from one registered group to another registered group. Afal pi shehu below ta'aseh tahor. Even though that is a prohibition, the meat remains tahor. It does not become tameh. My love, isn't it the following? Tahor va'asur. The meat may be tahor, but it's prohibited. Diotse mechavura lechavura. Ki yotse chutz lemechitzato dami umafsil. Because if the meat goes outside one registered group to another registered group, isn't that being similar to the meat going outside its proper boundary, comparable, and therefore it's invalid? Va'afilu hachi katani patahor. But, says the Gemara, even then, it's still taught that it is tahor. So therefore, that would seem to tell us, Alma lo gazru rabbanan tuma. Therefore, the rabbis did not decree meat, even from the Korban Pesach, excuse me, that may have gone outside its boundary as tameh. Sorry. Lo, that's not the case, says the Gemara. Tahor umutar. It's tahor and permitted. Diotse mechavura lechavura. That going outside of from one registered group to another registered group, lav kiyotse chutz lemechitzato dami, that it's not comparable to the meat going outside its proper boundary, velo mifsil, and it doesn't become invalid. So the Gemara continues, vaha kat Tane Seifa. But here, what about the fact that it teaches towards the end of the Braita, ha'ochlo harei zeh below ta'aseh, that the one who eats it, okay, it says he's committed a lav. Bishlema laman da'amar kibetza. That's acceptable. Before to the one we said that you had to have a minimum volume of an egg's worth, right? Why? The eat bay kazayat. Why? Because you have at least a olive's amount. Velit bay kabetza. And you don't have an egg volume. So even you have a minimum shiur, but it's not the minimum shiur that one held, and therefore it's not a problem. Elalamanda amar kazayat, but to the one who held that all you needed was an olive volume, right? Mai ikalamema. What are you going to say then? Ela rather, biyotse b'pesach lo mibayela. If it was a Pesach offering that went outside the Azara, that's not what we're questioning. Delo gazru rabbanan tuma. That the rabbis then did not decree it tameh, ma'itama. What was the reasoning? B'nei chavura zrizin hein. Because the people registered together as a group are zealous, let's say. Umizaher zehirebe, and they are concerned and careful about what happens with that Korban Pesach meat. Ela kime ba'ayelan. But when we discuss this and ask about it, biyotzei b'kedoshim, mai. It's when other offerings might go outside, right? What then is the situation? Teku. We haven't come to a final clear discussion. We have to let it stand. Now, let's come back, says the Gemara, and continue. Umotzi basar Pesach. We were talking about the removal of the Pesach offering meat from one registered group, lechavara, to another registered group. Minayin. How do we know that they don't the rabbis didn't decree that was tameh? The Tanya, because it's taught in a Braita, lo totzi min habayit min habasar chutza, that you shall not remove from the residence, from the house, that meat from that meat outside. Gemara says, hold on. Ein li ela mi bayit lebayit. That Braita seems to only tell me you can't remove it from one house to another house. Mechavura lechavura, from one registered group to another registered group. Maybe you have two groups in the same house. Minayin, how do we know that? Talmud Lomar, chutza. The Torah text said outside. Chutz la'achilato. Outside the area where it's supposed to be eaten. Now, Amar Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami says, Hamotzi basar Pesach michavura lechavura. Okay, one who transmits Pesach offering meat from one registered group to another registered group. Eino chayav ad sheyaniach. He is not held responsible or guilty until he puts that meat down. Namely, hotza'ah kativ bei keshabbat. It's carrying out the same way that it's written in regards to Shabbos. Namely, ma Shabbat ad avad akira bahanacha, the same way on Shabbos until he performs an act of uprooting and placing down. Af hachanami, here too then, ad avad akira bahanacha, until he has uprooted the Korban Pesach meat and then put it down in another location. Now, says the Gemara, Meitiv Rabbi Abba Bar Memo. Rabbi Abba Bar Memo challenged him with again a Braita. Hayu sovlim otan b'motot. Let's take a situation describing the inner offerings, okay, from the Beis Hamikdash. And they list the Kohanim are carrying them out, and they're doing so carrying them on poles. Sovlin otan b'motot. What happens? Once they carry these inner offerings out of the Azara to bring them to a burning place, let's say outside, Harishonim yatzu chutz lechomat ha'azara. Those Kohanim that are the first ones to exit outside the walls of the temple precinct. Okay, what happens? Va'acharonim lo yatzu, and the later Kohanim haven't come out yet. Harishonim mitam'in bigadim. Those first ones, their clothes already become tameh. Va'achronim ein mitam'in bigadim. And the later ones, their clothes have not become tamei. So the Gemara continues. V'ha lo nach. But we just said that you have to place it down for hotza'ah, like on Shabbos. And didn't we say if they're still carrying it on a pole, they haven't put it down yet in the Beit HaSreifa, in the place where it's supposed to be burnt? So the Gemara says now to us, regarding Rabbi Abba Bar Memel, hu motivla v'hu mefarekla. He raised the question, the challenge, and he answered it with the following, namely, benigrarim, namely that they were dragging it, and by dragging it on the ground, it was as if it had been placed. Okay, we get to a new Mishnah. Remember, we were talking before about a limb of the animal. If it went outside its proper place, its proper boundary. Okay. So the Mishnah continues now to give us a continuation, so to speak, of that earlier discussion. Ever shiatza miktsato, which Mishnah is telling us that a limb that went outside its proper boundary, chotech ad shemagia la'etzem, we cut until we reach the bone, v'kolef, and we peel off, ad shemagia la'perek, until we get to the joint, v'chotech, and we cut it, ubamukdashim, okay, and when we're talking about other offerings, kotzetz b'kofitz, we cut it off with a hatchet. She'ein bo mishum shavirat ha'etzem, because with regards to those other offerings, we don't have the prohibition stated in the Torah about breaking a bone.
Rabbi, what difference does it make if you cut something, let's say with a saw, which is really like breaking in a different way, or chopping it with a cleaver?
Okay, it's a good question, Bob. All right, let's see if the Gemara is going to address it. Okay.
Okay.
Because it would seem that if you're using a cleaver, okay, you would just be cutting straight through, right? You would cut at the joint. I mean, I'm not as familiar as probably I should be, although okay. Anyway, but when it says you cut it, if you have to cut it, that may be using a knife, okay, to cut up till you reach the bone, because then you still have to peel off and only then cut. Okay, so what happens here, says the Gemara. Okay, so our initial issue now is that the first part of this Mishnah spoke of being outside the boundary, right? What is outside? What do we mean by outside the boundary? What is the boundaries of the Azara? What's the boundaries of the walls around Yerushalayim? Okay, remember that we have to keep in mind that the same way that there were three sections, okay, in the Midbar with regards to the Mishkan, so those were made parallel to the temple, the Beis Hamikdash, the Azara, Yerushalayim, once the Beis Hamikdash was established, right? So that's part of our issue here, I think. So the Mishnah continues, Min ha'agaf v'lifnim, from the doorway, okay, towards the inside, kilifnim, that's considered inside. Okay. Now, Koren had a picture at this point of a doorway in a wall. Okay, and what we need to understand is I'm going to try to suggest it because I can't really show the picture again. Show the picture. Think of the wall being, let's say, I don't know, a foot thick. I'm just taking a rough example, okay? That the wall is a foot thick, but the doorway is indented in the wall, okay? And the doorway is maybe 6 inches in from the outside of the wall, and then from the doorway to the rest inside the area is just another 6 inches. Okay, so if we can imagine that kind of thing, all right, it meant that there was really 6 inches of wall that was outside the doorway, and 6 inches of then the doorway, and roughly 6 inches of wall then inside. Okay, so keeping that suggested idea in mind, okay, I'm coming back now, and it says, right, the following: Min ha'agaf, from the doorway, l'ulefnim, to the inside is considered kilefnim, like the inside. Umin ha'agaf ulachutz, and from the doorway to the outside, kilachutz, is considered like the outside. Hachalonot, in regards to any windows, va'ovei hachoma kilifnim, and any thick sections of the wall, okay, along with windows, would be considered inside. So the Gemara here now asks, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, L'chein letfilah. All of a sudden it says, and the same thing applies to davening, to worship. Upliga de Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, and there's an argument, right, with Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. The Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, who says, Afilu mechitza shel barzel, even a partition made of, let's say, iron or metal, eina mafseket ben Yisrael la'avihim shebashamayim, does not separate between the Jewish people and their Father in heaven. So what is he implying here? Vaha gufa kasha, says the Mishnah, the Gemara, I'm sorry. This Mishnah, especially at the end, itself is problematic. Amart min ha'agaf vilifnim kilifnim. You've said in the end part of the Mishnah that from the doorway towards the inside is like inside. Ha'agaf atzmo kilachutz. This would seem to imply that the doorway itself is outside. Ema seifa. But I would say, look then at the end further. Min ha'agaf v'lachutz kilachutz. If you say then from the doorway to the outside is like the outside, ha'agaf atzmo kilifnim. That seems to say, but the doorway itself is like the inside. Lo kasha. No, we don't have to see this as a problem. Says the Gemara, Kan b'sha'arei azara, Kan b'sha'arei Yerushalayim. In one situation, we're talking about the gates of the temple precinct. In another situation, we're talking about the gates surrounding the city. Da'amar Rabbi Yishmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. As said by Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak, the following: Mipnei ma lo nitkadshu sha'arei Yerushalayim. What was the basis that they did not sanctify the walls of Jerusalem? In other words, the walls entering the city. Mipnei shemitzoraim maginim tachtehen bechama mipnei hachama u'b'geshamim mipnei hageshamim. Why? Because the lepers would protect themselves from the sun, okay, by being, let's say, in that, what I call the 6 inches, okay, that area. Maybe the walls of the city were much thicker. The walls of a city could have been a foot thick, 2 feet thick, right? And the gate could have been further indented. Okay? So in the section that before you got into the doorway, to the door actually, that's where the lepers could protect themselves from either the sun or the rain. V'amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, what did he say? Mipnei ma lo nitkadsha sha'ar Nicanor. And why wasn't the gate of Nicanor, right? Why wasn't that gate sanctified? Okay, so remember the gate of Nicanor. I don't think that if you have on page Art Scroll, if you have 85B3, okay, and you look at the diagram there, on that diagram, you should see number 5, okay? Number 4 are the steps, and number 5 is the gate of Nicanor, okay? So we can see that there's what I'm going to call the area number 2, that's called the women's courtyard or the greater courtyard. Then you have steps, then you have the gate of Nicanor, then you have the Azara, the real temple precinct itself. Okay? So that's what he's referring to there. Okay? Mipnei, why? Shemitzorin omdin sham umachnisin bahonot yadam. Because the lepers then, after they have been purified, need to go through a process of sprinkling. And that's where they would put the thumbs of their hands. Right? Hachalonot v'ovei hachoma v'chulei. So now we get to the next part of the Mishnah. So what about the windows and the thick sections of the wall? Amar Rav, says Rav, right? Again, Gagin va'aliyot lo nitkadshu. That the roofs and the second stories of many of the buildings were not sanctified. Eini, is that really the case? Asks the Gemara. V'ha'amar Rav mishum Rabbi Chia. Didn't Rav say in the name of the Rabbi Chia the following common expression? Kezita pascha, like an olive amount of the Korban Pesach, Valelia paka igra. Okay? And he then said that if that's the case, that the area, right, we said was, it would sort of go through the noise, the resuscitation of Hallel, and the prayers and things like that, would, what we might use colloquially say, go through the roof, right? They would be so loud that they, right, would be heard through the roof. They would crack the roof. So going then a little bit on to Pevav. Mai lav da achle ba'agra va'amre ba'igra. Don't we say, asks the Gemara, that they used to eat the Korban Pesach on the roof and they would recite, namely recite Hallel on the roof as well? Lo, the achle ba'ara. No, says the Gemara. It's possible that they ate on the ground, in other words, inside the house on the ground level, va'amre be'igra, and they would say it, the Hallel, on the roof. Eini, is that really possible? Vahatnan, but isn't it taught elsewhere in a Mishnah? Ein maftirin achar haPesach afikomen. Okay, that famous phrase, right? That we do not transfer, continue, conclude the Pesach afikomen after, right? We don't conclude, in other words, we're not able to transfer our observances connected with the finishing of the meal regarding the Pesach offering, and then have, so to speak, some would say the dessert elsewhere. Va'amar Rav, says Rav, shelo ya'akru mechavura lechavura. This seems to, we understand that to mean that you cannot uproot. In other words, you can't go from one registered group to another registered group. Lo kasha. No, that's not a problem, says the Gemara. Kan b'sha'at achila, kan shelo b'sha'at achila. Here we're talking about during the eating time, you cannot transfer your location. But when we're not doing the eating time, in other words, after having finished eating and then going to recite Hallel, okay, that's different. Now, I'm mentioning this and then we'll finish up. Remember that our order of the Seder today was not like their order then. Okay, that they, right, had to eat, since they had to eat the Korban Pesach before midnight, they did most of their eating first, and then they went ahead with the recitations. Okay, so we're going to stop right here now, okay, for today, and we'll pick up tomorrow with this new Braita, okay, and see what Abba Shaul has to say, okay, and continue then. All right. So everybody have a good day today. Stay well.
Thank you very much. You too.
Okay.